Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Hawley introduced legislation that would ban members of Congress from owning or trading individual stocks. It extends to the president and vice president. Are you in favor of that legislation?
Well, I like it conceptually. I don't know about it, but I like it conceptually. And, you know, Nancy Pelosi became rich by having inside information. She made a fortune with her husband, and I think that's disgraceful. So in that sense, I'd like it, but I'd have to really see I study these things very carefully, and this just happened. So I'll take a look at it. But conceptually, I like it. And what I do think is Nancy Pelosi should be investigated, because she has the highest return of anybody practically in the history of Wall Street, save a few. How did that happen? It happened by she knows exactly what's going to happen, what's going to be announced. She buys stock, and then the stock goes up after the announcement's made. And she ought to be investigated.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So we got to talk about a full-blown freak-out meltdown that happened on CNN after Jake Tapper, Snake Tapper, confronted her on the legislation that is currently making its way through Congress to ban stock trading. Okay, and that means that Jake Tapper had to confront Nancy Pelosi on the allegations of insider trading, which over the years, okay, if you guys recall correctly, Nancy Pelosi has not handled these questions well about the alleged insider trading that she's done throughout her career in Congress. Take a look.
A senator, and I give you IPO shares in stock, and over the course of one day, that stock nets you $100,000. That's completely legal.
And former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and her husband had participated in at least 8 IPOs. One of those came in 2008 from Visa, just as a troublesome piece of legislation that would have hurt credit card companies began making its way through the House. Undisturbed by a potential conflict of interest, the Pelosis purchased 5,000 shares of Visa at the initial price of $44. 2 days later, it was trading at $64. The credit card legislation never made it to the floor of the House. Congresswoman Pelosi also declined our request for an interview, but agreed to call on us if we attended a news conference.
Madam Leader, I wanted to ask you why you and your husband back in March of 2008 accepted and participated in a very large IPO deal from Visa. At a time there was major legislation affecting the credit card companies making its way through the House. And did you consider that to be a conflict of interest?
I don't know what your point is of your question. Is there some point that you want to make with that?
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, do you think it's all right for a speaker to accept a very preferential and favorable stock deal?
Well, we didn't.
You participated in the IPO.
Well, I have many
and at the time you were
investments,
Speaker of the House. You don't think it was a conflict of interest or had the appearance of a conflict of interest?
It only has the appearance if you decide that you're going to have elaborate on a false premise. But it's not true, and that's that.
I don't understand what part's not true.
Yeah, so it should be no surprise that when Jake Tapper brought up this topic, that Nancy Pelosi didn't handle it too well. Take a look.
This afternoon, President Trump mentioned you, and he made an allegation about your investments. I want to roll that clip and then give you a chance to respond.
Yeah.
Seem to be having some sort of
investments.
Yeah,
it
was. Let me just read what he said. I'm sorry that we had some sort of technical issue. Nancy Pelosi became rich.
Why do you have to read that? We're here to talk about the 60th anniversary of Medicaid. That's what I agreed to come to talk about.
Yeah, but I wanted
what that means in the election.
I wanted to give you a chance just to respond. He accused you of insider trading. What's your response to that?
That's ridiculous. In fact, I very much support the trading of members of Congress. Not that I think anybody's doing anything wrong. If they are prosecuted and they go to jail. But because of the confidence it instills in the American people, don't worry about this. But I have no concern about the obvious investments that had been made over time. I'm not into it, my husband is, but it isn't anything to do with anything insider. But the president has his own exposure, so he's always projecting. He's always projecting. And let's not give him any more time on that, please. We're going forward here, and I'm very proud of my family. And while he might make fun of us, while somebody inspired by him breaks into our home and hits my husband in a deadly fashion, hits my husband over the head, and he thinks that's a riot, I'd rather not go into some of my other complaints about him right now. Rather to talk about the 60th anniversary of Medicaid and Medicare. What a triumph, a great pillar of economic and health security for the American people. We had over the weekend a Caring Across Generations initiative of a 60-hour.
Yeah, so you see that, you heard that. Okay, that is Nancy Pelosi once again freaking out and getting angry after being asked a question about her insider trading allegation, something that she clearly does not want to talk about. Now, can you guys imagine how the media would react if Trump reacted that way? Let's say, for example, when it comes to Epstein, right? In which, I mean, we have seen the media react the way that they're reacting right now when President Trump doesn't want to talk about Epstein. Do you think that the media is going to spend the next 24 hours talking about Nancy Pelosi avoiding answering questions about insider trading, right? Do you think that the media is going to say, you know, this freak out from Nancy Pelosi is kind of weird. Maybe she has something to hide, right? Maybe she has something that she doesn't want to talk about. Like, for example, the fact that the Pelosi, since 2014, have yielded upwards of 700% returns. I mean, Pelosi is a better fund manager than the best hedge fund managers in the world, okay? How is it that the timing of these trades from the Pelosi's just always seem to align with certain regulatory events that could either send the stock soaring or that could tank a stock, right? In the sense that they get out of a trade before there's regulatory action. Like, for example, there were some very timely trades of Microsoft and Visa that were made by the Pelosi's. And before the DOJ filed antitrust charges against Visa, Paul Pelosi sold the stock, right? They also sold the stock of Microsoft ahead of the FTC probe, right? So when there are good things that happen for these stocks that Nancy Pelosi and her husband are buying, you see them buying them before the good things happen, right? But before bad things happen, they're selling them. And I'm just saying, a lot of people have questions in regards to how is it that the Pelosi's are the best fund managers in the world. And that is how I would have presented the question to Nancy Pelosi. Jake Tapper, let's be honest, he was soft as hell. And that's the crazy part about mainstream liberal media. If Nancy Pelosi was a Republican and a Republican decided to freak out like that, do you think that Jake Tapper would have just laid down and allowed the Republican to run over him, right? No, they would have stood their ground and said, no, I want to talk about this. I want to answer questions about it because, look, you have made some very strange trades, right? Some very timely trades, okay? You are generating astronomical returns. The American people deserve to know whether or not you're making trades based off insider knowledge. Are you using your position of power in order to enrich yourself? The American people deserve to know. That's how they would have handled that had a Republican freaked out the way that Nancy Pelosi freaked out. But because it's Nancy Pelosi, Snake Tapper allowed himself to be run over, right? Just allow her to filibuster with some nonsense. It's hilarious. Nancy Pelosi comes into these interviews with the expectation that the mainstream liberal, they're not going to ask her one hard question. And if they do ask her a hard question, she goes off on them, right? Again, almost as if there's supposed to be a wink and a nod, right? Backdoor handshake agreement. Don't ask me tough questions. If you ask me tough questions, there's going to be a problem, right? I'm going to limit your access. I'm not going to let you interview me, right? And there are going to be severe consequences if you confront me with real questions. If you don't let me come on your network and to shit on Trump the whole time, right? If you don't let me do that, then there's a problem. That's clearly what Nancy Pelosi outlined to Jake Tapper, right? She put Jake Tapper in his place. And he capitulated. It would actually be funnier if it wasn't for the fact that the corruption is so in your face, right? So with that being said, Nancy did mention briefly that she supported the legislation from Josh Hawley. And that is what is leading to some issues between the White House, Republicans, and Josh Hawley and Democrats on this piece of legislation, because apparently Josh Hawley has been working with Democrats in order to add provisions to this piece of legislation that not only affects Congress, but also bans the White House as well, too. But he didn't consult with the White House or Republicans before making these changes, and that is pissing them off.
Well, lawmakers in Washington, D.C. are actually working on legislation to ban stock trading for members of Congress and the president and vice president after years of discussions. As Rebecca Castor reports, the bill has bipartisan support, but faces several roadblocks.
The days of lawmakers cashing in on Wall Street could be numbered as the Senate works on a new bill to ban trading for Congress.
Members of Congress get briefings. They get information presented to them. It's not technically insider information under our current laws, but let's be honest, it's information that members of the general public don't have access to.
Dubbing it the PELOSI Act, Missouri Senator Josh Hawley's bill bans members of Congress from trading or holding individual stocks. But it also goes all the way up to the White House, banning the president and vice president from trading too.
Before I ran for office, in my primary, I sold all my individual stocks, sold all my operating businesses, because I didn't want any conflicts of interest. And that should exist for every single elected official, not just here in Washington, D.C., I'd say every elected official.
Reportedly, Hawley added the White House to the bill to secure Democrats' support. President Trump has previously said he would sign legislation banning stock trading for lawmakers. But with the executive branch now included, the White House says it presents constitutional concerns. Article 2 already prevents financial conflicts of interest for the president. Senator Hawley's office says the ban would take effect at the start of a lawmaker's term. So even if the White House is included, this would not affect President Trump.
Yeah, so again, this is kind of a big deal. And the reason why it's kind of a big deal is because of the fact that Josh Hawley is being seen as working with Democrats to pass this piece of legislation that President Trump says he agrees with, like in principle, right? The principle of banning stock trades in Congress. But because he's adding provisions to the legislation, that clearly is an attack on the White House, or put it this way, it's a Democrat attempted attack on the White House, because Democrats apparently only agreed to get on board with this if the White House provisions were added. This is why Republicans and President Trump, this is why they're kind of pissed off with Josh Hawley over this. Also, on top of that, there are questions about the implications of this bill, like how strict this bill is when it comes to banning conflicts of interest, banning congressmen from being able to have businesses or to have any type of kind of outside investments while serving in Congress or while serving in the White House as well, too. And that is an issue that spilled over into Congress. And that is part of the reason why I think that even though there's a lot of movement on this bill, and I'm glad that there is, because we definitely should be banning stock trading, okay, by members of Congress. And also on top of that, I mean, I think that it's reasonable to have restrictions on the White House as well, too. But again, that's more of a different kind of legal issue. The problem is that because Republicans aren't necessarily on board with Josh Hawley working with Democrats behind their back, right, in ways that they don't like, that is creating some issues, okay? And that is why, unfortunately, this legislation may not get that far, okay? Because you're definitely going to need some Republican support in order to have a chance of passing. And even if it does pass Congress, if the president vetoes it, then it almost surely is not going to become law. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this.
Here's what I would say. I think that at the end of the day, if you're asking me why do we need to eliminate blind trusts, it's because blind trusts, I think, are often workarounds because they can be structured in multiple different ways, right? There's not one way to structure blind trust, correct? Or there's only one way?
There is a way that you have to structure it if you're in the Senate and going through ethics. Have you gone through that process before?
No, because I don't have any of these securities, James, because when I got elected, I sold all of my trusts and assets.
Great.
I don't have a blind trust. I practice what I preach. I don't have individual stocks. I don't trade in stocks. I'm not a billionaire, unlike others on this committee. And what I think is the American people are sending us a clear message, and I hope that they are watching this today, They're sending us a message that they want us to behave as they behave.
Got it. So I'm just trying to ask some questions. I'm trying to figure out some things on this because of the way that it's shaped. I've got to be able to work through this. I do believe the qualified blind trust works. The folks that you're mentioning, I think, are folks that say, hey, I had a stockbroker, I had somebody that was handling that, but that was not a qualified blind trust. That's a very different structure to be able to have that. There's prohibited communication there. Many of the accusations that have come in the past several years have been somebody else was handling it, but it wasn't a qualified blind trust. So I was confused on why this particular one, because there haven't been accusations on that. That's somebody that comes in with some wealth, which I don't have, which you don't have. Someone with some wealth that comes in and says, hey, this family inheritance, whatever they may have, worked their whole life, got it, they can put in a blind trust over there. This also requires several things here. It requires you sell it rather than just prohibit trades. Several times I've heard you mention, hey, they shouldn't be trading in it. What about individuals that had stocks when they came? Why should they sell it to be able to be here? Why not just have a flat-out prohibition to say you can no longer buy, no longer sell? If you have it, stock market goes up and down, you can't touch it. You have to just leave it there. Why not? What was the decision to be able to say you got to sell it all rather than just you can't trade anymore?
Well, there is a ban on trading that would take effect immediately for all members, not just new members who are coming in, but for all members.
Right.
So I've been saying over and over that you have until your next term, should you be reelected, in order to divest. But you make the important point that the trading would be prohibited immediately.
Right.
Your question is why even in the next term require people to divest? I think that the answer to that is because you know what you own, presumably. I mean, you know that you have assets in the following securities. That constitutes a financial interest, a pecuniary interest. And it presents a conflict of interest to be getting briefings, voting on legislation, doing these things where you know you could be increasing or decreasing the value.
Yeah. Senator Hawley, you said that I voted for the bill before. You also committed to work with me to improve the bill, which you didn't do. So let's think about where we are. I think everybody on this committee, nobody wants people to do trading. I think we all would agree with that.
Your mic on?
Yeah. Nobody would like people to do trading. We've watched Nancy Pelosi. Seems like she's figured out how to make a fortune off of trading. We'd all like to make as much money as she made in trading. I don't know anybody in the country that's done that well. So, but if you look at this, if you have a small business, you come up here, all right? It's illiquid. There's no buyer. What are you going to do? You just give it away. So you're telling people, let me finish. Okay, there's no buyer. If it's illiquid, there's no buyer. That's why it's called illiquid, right? You made a reference to billionaires, okay? I don't know when in this country it became a negative to make money. But somehow, if you've made money, you're supposedly, I think Senator Hawley suggests, you shouldn't be serving because you might trade stocks. Now, I came up here, I made money. I started out never knowing my dad, living in public housing. I lived the dream that many of us want to live, not be broke. I went to junior college, joined the Navy. I didn't go to some elite university. I went to the cheapest place I could find, and I went and built businesses. But somehow now, if you've made money, somehow it's negative up here. I did what Senator Johnson did. When I became governor of Florida, I sold my operating businesses, right? I did a blind trust while I was governor. I never saw what was in the blind trust. I never traded one thing that was in the blind trust. Somebody else did it. Now in this job, I don't trade stocks. I own operating businesses. But somehow, it's suspect because I made money. I don't know how many people in the audience, how many of you don't want to make money? Anybody want to be poor? I don't. Right? So this idea that we're going to attack people because they make money is wrong. Is absolutely wrong. We should cherish all of our different backgrounds. Every one of us has a different background. I've got a business background. But what I was just accused of is making money, and somehow I can't be fair and do things the right way. So I think it's disgusting what is going on here. So, but, I agree with, I completely agree with you. We've got to stop people from trading stocks. But this is way different. This is an attack against the president, attack against the vice president. That's what this is. So I think it's wrong.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to correct that Senator Scott said that if you have a small business, you'd be forced to sell it. Small businesses are explicitly exempted under this bill. The 1,200 employees, they are not covered. If you have a small business, you can maintain your ownership in that business throughout the entire time. And I don't mind anybody being rich. What I mind is people getting rich while they're here trading stock, which I think we can all agree on. And this bill would put a stop to.
So 1,200 employees. I had one company with 285,000 employees. That was publicly traded, but when it was private, it was not liquid. I had a variety of manufacturing companies that had a lot of employees. That stock was illiquid. I mean, if any of you bought and sold companies, you do not have, somebody's going to buy today. I know I can walk out the door and there'll be somebody to buy the company. So we're going to make people sell things when it might be an absolute worst time to sell something. And they busted their butt to go build that business, and then they want to come up here and serve, and then we say, well, you got to give up your net worth. That's wrong.
I'd like to make one quick point, and Senator Johnson, on the idea of whether you're a small business or not. I was a physician. There was 150 physicians in my practice, and we owned a bunch of stuff altogether, and we probably had 1,500, 2,000 employees. Sounds like I would have to divest as well. So you could be a small member of a large group that has a lot of money and a lot of employees, and you'd have to divest. I think there's just a lot of things that are not thought through here. Senator Johnson.
I'd like to make a couple more points. I've been here.
Yeah. So you get the gist of kind of some of the issues, and this is the reason why I'm playing this clip, because I just don't want anybody to be surprised if Republicans don't get on board with this. Some of the reasons why is because, again, Josh Hawley decided to work with Democrats in order to get his legislation going, which, I get where he's coming from. Like, I'm with him in principle, in the sense that, yes, we should prevent our elected officials from getting rich off of their positions in Congress. But I do think that you have to also understand the politics behind working with Democrats on this instead of working with Republicans. And also on top of that, again, apparently he added that White House provision in there in order to get Democrats on board with it. And when you kind of understand how politics works, you kind of understand the game in the sense that sometimes politicians support things that they know is not going to pass because it makes it look like they support something that they actually don't support. Pelosi coming out here and supporting this bill because there's White House provision being in it tells me that she doesn't really actually support it. She's only kind of supporting it because she knows it's not really going to pass, right? Which leaves her free to support something that is popular to support, but she knows it's not going to pass. That's how these politicians play the game. And that's why I think that Josh Hawley in this situation, while I agree with him in principle, it would have been better for him to work for Republicans on it. And they probably should have started off with, let's say, for example, limiting or banning stock trades by members of Congress, right? In fact, I don't think they should be totally out of the market, right? I think that members of Congress should be allowed to have index funds, right? They should be allowed to have broad-based, market-based index funds, because I do think it's important for our lawmakers to participate in the broader economy, because that would incentivize them to make good decisions about the broader economy, right? Because a lot of people's wealth, their retirement is tied in the stock market. So, yeah, you want politicians to make decisions that are going to be good for people's retirements, that are going to be good for people's finances. So, yeah, I think it makes sense for the politician to have some skin in the game, but they should not be able to make money off of individual trades, right? And industry events that they know are going to happen because of the legislation that they're passing in Congress that's done in secret, that the public does not know about until, it's passed, or until, there's some action from the DOJ or from the FTC, the regulators. These politicians, they're in on all this stuff before it happens, right? So they're able to make these trades before it happens. They get rich. They make a lot of money. And it's something that the American people want to stop. And with that being said, again, I agree with Josh Hawley in principle. I just think that he should have really just stuck to working with Republicans on this, because I think that he's participating in a Democrat game that ultimately is going to result in nothing happening at all, because of the fact that I don't think Republicans are going to get on board with this, the legislation as it currently is. And if they don't get on board with it, Trump is definitely not going to sign it. And if it gets vetoed, there's not enough support for it in Congress to override a veto. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.